Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today we're going to go deep into 1920s Harlem in a full review of the classic Call of Cthulhu horror adventure, Dead Man Stomp, an adventure that has been around since 1991 and included in almost every edition of Call of Cthulhu since. Dead Man Stomp is famous for its full embrace of the 1920s. It's centered around a struggling Harlem jazz musician who stumbled into the crosshairs of Nyarlathotep, the elder god who thrives on madness. It pits players not only against all the 1920s tropes you'd expect, prohibition, speakeasies, mobsters, jazz clubs, but also against very dark magic and also the bias and racism that existed in that era. But Dead Man Stomp was written over 35 years ago. Role-playing has evolved a lot in the decades since, although I'll admit that a lot of early Call of Cthulhu adventures are still classics for a reason. Is Dead Man Stomp one of them? Does it still hold up, or is it best left back in the early 1990s? Well, grab your trumpets and Tommy guns, because not only am I going to give you a full review of Dead Man Stomp, I'm going to give you GM some tips and tricks on how to run this old school adventure like a pro. But be warned, there are spoilers ahead. So if you're thinking about playing in this adventure, well, you probably want to duck out the back door and I won't tell anyone you were here. All right, here we go. Dead Man Stomp is written by Mark Morrison. It first appeared in 1991 in the 4th edition of Call of Cthulhu, from what I can tell. It runs about 25 pages in the modern incarnation, and while it's possible to finish this adventure in a single session, there's enough open-ended exploration that it could take your group 2 sessions to complete, though I've always managed to finish it in 1. While this adventure is found among the Call of Cthulhu starter adventures, it really is a full-on adventure without a lot of handholds for keepers. But I like that the adventure includes some plot hooks to pull investigators from some other starter adventures like Edge of Darkness, which is a classic one. The setup of the adventure is this. A sad alcoholic jazzman, Leroy Turner, has come into the possession of a very special trumpet. He thinks it was given to him by Louis Armstrong himself, but it was in fact given to him by Nyarlathotep, an elder god with a strong personality who loves to cause madness and chaos. And this trumpet, if played by a gifted musician like Leroy, will do exactly that, because when it's played, it will raise the dead. Leroy has no idea of its power, but he'll soon find out. The adventure begins with the PCs summoned by a friend to a Harlem speakeasy and jazz club, Small's Paradise, where Leroy will be playing. While it's prohibition, the liquor here is being served freely and everyone from politicians, actors, mobsters, even the mayor himself enjoys this place. But the PC's contact never shows up. But while they're at a table enjoying the drink and music, a man next to them, an accountant named Peter Manusco, is approached by a low-level mobster and shot in the back of the head, and the gunman flees. But soon, with the band still swinging away, led by Leroy and his special trumpet, Peter Manusco shambles to his feet, mutters the name of his killer, and stumbles out of the club. Hysterically, and I don't know why I find this funny, he wanders outside the club and promptly gets run over by a car. Joey! After this crazy and chaotic event, the players will put together that perhaps it was the music from the band that brought Manusco back to life, and this will kickstart their investigation. Now, I'm going to pause here and point out that this is a very, very specific and linear opening, and it doesn't leave much for player agency. If a gunman shows up 3 feet away and shoots someone dead, I guarantee you that one of your players is going to tackle him. But the adventure insists that he gets away. The gunman's needed for later in the adventure. But I just find this improbable in a role-playing game. Maybe if he was shot from 30 feet away, you could plausibly say that he escapes through the crowd, but definitely not like standing right here. Second, Why on earth is the band still playing after MINUSCO is shot? Like, the plot requires him to die and then the trumpet to bring him back to life, so the adventure says the band just kind of keeps playing. I feel like someone loudly murdered by a .45 is going to bring screams and an instant halt to everything in this club. Now, of course, the adventure needs MINUSCO to rise to his feet to kick off the supernatural weirdness that every Call of Cthulhu adventure needs, but it just doesn't make sense to me that the band would just keep going here. And when zombie MINUSCO does rise to his feet and runs off, again, what happens if the players grab him? Nope, that can't happen in the opening of this adventure because he's got to run outside to get run over. Player actions are really just not accounted for in this opening. I've run this adventure twice. The first time when I was a newer GM years ago when it first came out, and then again more recently. The first time I ran it as described, and my players were incredulous at how this all went down. The last time I changed it up. I actually started the adventure immediately after the gunshot and the murder. I explained that the players were enjoying some music at this club, and suddenly they were splattered by blood. People were screaming. The band stopped, except for a very drunk Leroy Turner is oblivious and still playing his trumpet on stage, along with an equally drunk drummer behind him. The killer had just gotten away. Cops were grabbing the PCs and pushing them to the ground, thinking that maybe they were involved. Then, as the players are trying to negotiate through this chaotic scene, the body comes back to life, far enough away that he can stumble through the crowd without chase. Starting in media res and all of this chaos not only instantly makes this more believable, but also just gives a lot for the players to figure out and do from the very beginning. But let's keep going. After the chaos, the nightclub is a mess. A few bystanders blame the band for this incident. I like to add that the people think that the band is bad luck. They blame the hit on them, maybe even mention that a fire started at the last place they played. The adventure even includes one old lady who swears that the drummer in the band keeps a voodoo chicken leg in his drum. This is a total red herring, but I like it because it gives the players more theories to think about. If they think the band is up to no good, it will keep the spotlight off of Leroy for just a little bit longer, which is good. But the PCs will likely want to talk to the band, its leader, or that drummer, or Leroy, but they're all gone. Role-playing with the survivors lets the PCs find out that the band leader, Charlie Johnson, will be at a funeral the next day. Or the PCs can find a dropped funeral home business card from one of them. Again, I just don't love how linear this is. The adventure needs the PCs not to talk to the band here, and instead meet them at the funeral home the next day. So I just make this a little bit more realistic. I say that during the commotion, the police tried to drag the drunk Leroy off stage, but he took a swing at them. He fought back. And this being 1920s Harlem, that's not a great idea for him to do that. Charlie, the band leader, came to his defense, and a bunch of them and the band members were all just loaded up in a car and taken downtown. They'll be released later on, but this makes a good reason for why the PCs can't immediately get to them and start questioning them. The next day, the PCs can do some open-ended exploration. They can find Peter MINUSCO's apartment, which shows that he had real mob connections, probably what led to the hit. Or they can try to find Leroy and discover that he's suffered some real tragedy recently. They won't find him, but they'll find out that his parents died recently and he lost the love of his life in a horrible car accident. The adventure will really make you feel bad for poor old Leroy. When the PCs visit that funeral home, they'll find several African Americans about to start a traditional funeral procession for a man named Freddie Fayette. A kind of random guy in the community. He seems nice enough. He's a hard worker. Also at the funeral, but hidden in the crowd, is the hitman from the previous night, Joey Larson, who's tailing the PCs to make sure that they don't turn him in after likely recognizing his face at the club. Leroy Turner is there at the funeral too, and he does what all good trumpet players would do. He raises his trumpet to play a funerary dirge during the procession, and of course, Freddie's casket bursts open and an undead Freddie Fayette shambles to life and starts causing chaos in the crowd. After the chaos and dealing with that zombie, the PCs finally get a chance to talk directly to Leroy. He insists that his trumpet came from Louis Armstrong, but he soon admits that Louis Armstrong had eyes that looked like they were pools of blackness, so probably not the real Louis Armstrong. And if the players inspect his trumpet, well, they find that it has scaly silver finish on it, and it's got an encircling ring of occult symbols in the horn. Now, the adventure says that Leroy won't lend his trumpet to the players. But again, I just don't know. My players have zero problems confiscating obviously evil cursed items from stupid or drunk NPCs. And the adventure doesn't really allow for them to take it. If they do, the adventure's over. And it's just not that hard to take it from this guy. He's not that tough, he's not that intimidating, he's drunk a lot, in fact. So I have two ways to address this issue, although it's frustrating to find yet another solution to a very railroady moment in this adventure. First, you could say that there are police officers nearby that would definitely intercede if the players obviously try to take something valuable from Leroy. He'll make a commotion, they'll come over and put an end to it. Second, and I think I actually like this better, but I haven't used it, you could say that it's actually Leroy that's cursed, not the trumpet exactly. Any trumpet that he plays turns into this weird occult thing from Nyarlathotep. So if the player sees the trumpet, they'll find within an hour or two that it's just a normal trumpet. But as soon as Leroy practices with a different replacement trumpet, it turns into this Nyarlathotep trumpet. Think of it as a cooler solution as to why the PCs just can't nab the trumpet and end the adventure. They got to deal with Leroy and the trumpet both. Like I said, I haven't tried that myself, but I think it would work, so give it a go, let me know how it goes. With the funeral disrupted and over, Leroy goes to leave, but he's suddenly grabbed by mobsters, forcibly loaded into an old Packard. This kidnapping was arranged by the mobster Joey Larson. Remember, he was at the funeral watching this whole thing happen, and he suspects that Leroy and his trumpet is doing some interesting voodoo things that the mob really wants to find out about. Leroy's taken to an old garage in Harlem, and the PCs better follow. If they don't, again, the adventure goes a little off the rails. Boss Bonato, this mob boss, is intrigued by Leroy's supposed powers. He has an idea to test to see if this whole trumpet thing is for real. Joey, so you bring me all the way out here to this stinking garage to see a magic voodoo trumpet that can bring people back to life. Is that right, Joey? Well, tell you what, sounds a little far-fetched to me, but just for you, we're gonna give it a try. Hey Dom, give me your gun. Yeah, pretty classic mob boss move there. So the boss shoots his underling Joey and tells Leroy to bring him back to life with a little smooth jazz. This works, but zombie Joey goes berserk and starts attacking everyone. The mob boss demands his men take Leroy to a safe house as they deal with the zombie. But then Leroy suddenly makes a dash for it, escapes his captors, and disappears into the city before the PCs can really do anything about it. And then, actually, could we just go visit Arkham Asylum for a second? Come here. I mean, seriously, this guy, Leroy, has Harry Houdini level plot armor. Chaosium should have just written narrative immunity on his stat sheet. Leroy's not an NPC. He's a freaking weather pattern, just floats from one scene to the next. Nothing you can do about it, along with his cursed Nyarlathotep trumpet that nobody can grab. Nothing you can do will work. It's so frustrating. Okay, I'm calm. Let's get back to it. So the PCs now need to track Leroy down again. This time, he's gone to his dead girlfriend's grave. Finally realizing the full extent of his trumpet's power, he plans to bring her back to life, hoping she can fix all of his life's problems. He's really not that smart, seeing how the last zombie went berserk and he's in the middle of a cemetery, but okay. So he plays his final dirge and aggressive zombies start rising from the ground everywhere. And zombies in Call of Cthulhu are pretty tough, so the PCs are likely to be cut down by a mob of them unless they move fast. So they need to stop Leroy from playing, which they can do either through some good role playing, or grabbing the trumpet, or just shooting the poor guy dead. And This is actually a pretty clever part because if they do shoot him, Leroy blows his dying breath into the trumpet and resurrects himself, coming back as an undead thing who breathes unnatural life now into the trumpet, which actually starts causing gravestones to shatter. This doesn't really do anything in the adventure, just describes this and doesn't say what happened. So I just had to rule the ground starts cracking open and forcing the players to make some rolls, or maybe taking D4 damage when the gravestones start exploding around them. Just add a little thing there to punish players for taking the easy way out. But if the PCs can stop Leroy and finally take away his trumpet, the PCs have won the day and they've foiled Nyarlathotep's fun. And that's Dead Man Stomp. So what do I think? I think this is a wonderful story, but a poor adventure, especially by today's standards. It's ridiculously linear. There's barely any room for player agency between the scenes. NPCs come and go freely, key items like the trumpet can't be interfered with until the very end, and other than Leroy, who's actually very well developed, the mobsters and the side players are very generic with no real personality and strong motivations of their own. I mean, I love this adventure's concept, a jazz-themed adventure across Harlem with a down-on-his-luck trumpet player seeming to cause chaos behind him, but it just doesn't come together or work here. Any amount of player unpredictability is going to derail this adventure. If the PCs catch the mobster Joey Larson at the club, well, half the adventure falls away, unless the GM creates another link to the players and the mob on their own. If the PCs don't show up at some random guy's funeral, well, the GM now has to create a whole other scene for them to meet Leroy. If the PCs grab the trumpet from Leroy while he's drunk, adventure over. There's just so many things that can go wrong here, and each time I've run it, I've had to face those problems. I think a really strong GM can improvise their way through this and still maintain the best parts and connect it all together, but that's just going to require a lot of juggling and extra work. The adventure is just not structured the way it needs to be. If I were to rewrite Dead Man Stomp, I would structure it more like a Vaesen adventure. In Vaesen, if you're not familiar, adventures always have a countdown clock running alongside the investigation, inevitably ending in a catastrophe if the players don't solve the mystery by the end. So written like this, the PCs would be called in to investigate a supposed incident of the rising dead at a club. Then, following a few trails across different Harlem locations, they'd run into Leroy and the band enough times to wonder whether they're involved. But each interaction with Leroy would raise his stress levels as well as the knowledge of what he's doing. The first time, maybe he goes and tries his horn at a funeral parlor just to see what happens. The next time, in his desperation, he tries to sell his services to a mobster, which then gets him in deep and in trouble. Finally, then he ends up at the cemetery, threatening to raise hundreds of dead people along with his girlfriend, which will cause the death of hundreds of people in Harlem if he pulls it off. Written like this, a sandbox of locations with a countdown timer, Dead Man Stomp would work. But written as a linear adventure with thin clues between the events, it just doesn't. But like I always say, we learn things from old adventures. This adventure was written at a time where Call of Cthulhu and horror games were barely 10 years old, and I applaud it for its obvious love for the era, the boldness to set it in 1920s Harlem amidst racial tensions, and focus on authentic history and jazz music. That stuff is cool and remains cool. If you do run this adventure, be sure to look up the Spotify playlists people have created for it. They've done a wonderful job bringing authentic jazz music of the era to your table. If you enjoyed this old school review and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. If you don't, I have it on authority that Nyarlathotep is going to be gifting you a cursed instrument after your next concert. And if you've played in Dead Man Stomp, let me know how it went for your group. Did your players survive the zombies at the end? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if someone shows you their obviously evil snake metal trumpet, just take it from them right then and there. Don't wait until they're at the cemetery.
Leroy Turner down Atlantic Street, horn in his hand, but his heart skipped a beat. Life hit hard, left him low and alone. Then a shadow said, boy, I'll make you known.